faculty and staff and community members. Before we begin, I would like to just share our goal for today, and it is to have a meaningful conversation about advocacy, about solidarity, and about justice. This event, like I said, it is being hosted by SJP, and we are grateful to have all of you guys here just ready with us to engage, learn, and build community. And so to begin, I'd like to pass it over to Yessie to share more with you about who SJP is, and then after that, we'll go over tonight's agenda.
Hi, everybody. My name is Yessie. I am so happy to be here and so happy to see so many people logged in today. I am honored to introduce Students for Justice in Palestine at Stanislaus State. SJP at Stan State is part of a larger network of over 200 Palestine solidarity organizations across Northern America. Our mission is to unite students in the fight for Palestinian freedom through education, advocacy, and political engagement. We are committed to justice, solidarity, and safety, working to equip students with the tools to advocate effectively, whether that's on campus, in our communities, or within our broader activist networks. As a chapter of National SJP, we stand against all forms of oppression and strive for a future rooted in justice and self-determination for the Palestinian people. We welcome all students, faculty, and community members who share this vision and are ready to learn, to engage, and to take action. Thank you all for being here tonight. We look forward to building this movement together and getting connected in the Central Valley.
Yes, thank you, Yessie. And so now we're going to do an overview of the rest of the agenda. We're going to have Dr. Nevares next introduce our first two guest speakers of the evening. And then following them, we will jump into our Q&A session with our panelists, where we're going to explore key topics related to advocacy and justice for Palestine. And after that panel discussion, we're going to open it up to the audience so you can ask questions to our panelists, just giving you a chance to engage directly with them. And to close the evening, we'll provide an opportunity for each and every one of you to connect with whichever organization or guest speaker you want to connect with. And that is going to be through breakout rooms, where you're going to be able to learn more about their work. And our goal is also for you to get involved in any of the organizations, or just learn how to, if you're coming from a different area, maybe learn where or what organizations to find around your area. And so we're going to get started with Dr. Nevares.
Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Diane Nevares. I'm an assistant professor of liberal studies at Stan State. And I want to begin by introducing our first speaker, Dr. Brandon Wolfe-Hunnicut, associate professor of history at CSU Stanislaus, whose work centers American foreign policy in the modern Middle East. He is also here representing Faculty for Justice in Palestine.
Well, thank you very much, Shirley, and everybody for organizing this event and giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm going to give a little overview of the conflict. I know we have a full agenda and it's a long history, so I won't try not to get too into the details. Let's see, trying to share my screen. Okay. And thank you very much for the very generous introduction, Dr. Nevares. And so my idea, everybody can see my screen now, yes? Thumbs up, you can see my screen. Okay, so my basic idea, I thought I'd provide a very, as I said, very brief overview of the history of the conflict, mostly just a look at the geography of the conflict, so that we kind of understand the basic, land territory that's in dispute. And then I'm just going to flash a few maps and try to explain how those lines have been drawn over the decades, and then drill into a little bit more detail towards the end, talking about how we arrived at the ceasefire. That phase one of it is just reaching its culmination. We're coming through the end of phase one now, and very uncertain time as we go into phase two of the ceasefire. So I just wanted to give a a very brief overview of kind of where we're coming from, where we're going, where the conflict is currently situated. So I hope that's of use. Okay, so long history here, and I'm not going to try to go into all of it, but I just want to say real briefly to start that for nearly 400 years, Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived in the Holy Land, lived in Ottoman Palestine under Ottoman rule, and with mutual understanding and interreligious, interfaith harmony and coexistence, and the various groups shared the land and shared one another's customs. And so they're very much a modern conflict. That's one thing that I think is a common misunderstanding, is the idea that this is a conflict that goes back hundreds or thousands of years as opposed to decades. And it's important to remember that there was a long period of history of peaceful coexistence amongst the various peoples living in the land of Palestine. That all starts to change, obviously not in one fell swoop, but a big decisive change happens at the end of World War I, when the British and French partitioned the Arab lands of the Ottoman Empire into respective British and French spheres of interest. And as the British did that, they committed themselves through what was known as the 1917 Balfour Declaration to the establishment of a Jewish state in the heart of the Arab and Muslim world. That's obviously a longer history, but the idea was, well, from the British standpoint, the idea was trying to establish a client regime, a kind of a set of a satellite, an outpost that would guard their strategic interests in the Suez Canal and in the access to the oil fields in Iraq and Iran, and the Persian Gulf Sea and shipping lanes to British India. So obviously with the advent of the Balfour Declaration and the British setting about establishing a Jewish state, that created conflicts with the indigenous Palestinian people living on the land beforehand. You can see that over the course, as the European anti-Semitism reared its ugly head, especially most ferociously under the Nazi regime in Germany, European Jews fleeing European anti-Semitism, persecution, ultimately the Holocaust, sought refuge in the British Mandate of Palestine. And you can see the population figures here showing that by the end of World War II, Jewish population had risen to almost a third, to about 31% of the population of Palestine. This becomes somewhat complicated when the British, as their empire was collapsing, as they were turning away from World War II and focusing more of their energy and attention on domestic reform and domestic building up their own sort of social welfare state at home, they withdrew from a lot of their international commitments, including their colony in India, and including their mandate in Palestine. And so as the British withdrew from the territory, they handed over the matter of Palestine, the question of Palestine, to the newly formed United Nations, which had no army, which had no organizational or any sort of capacity to reconcile the competing claims. But nonetheless, the United Nations put together in November of 1947 the map you see on the left here of a two-state solution to the conflict between Arabs and Jews in Palestine. So as you can see on the map, what was to be the state of Israel was this sort of N-shaped configuration. This would be the newly formed state of Israel, and then the areas in this orange hue were to be a Palestinian state. Now, the problem with this configuration is that nowhere in this N-shaped territory did Jews constitute anything near a majority. This is land ownership, not population, but it sort of shows the basic idea that nowhere in this territory did Jews control the majority of the land or constitute a demographic majority. And so that created the essential problem of how do you establish an exclusively Jewish state in a land that is overwhelmingly non-Jewish. Now, the solution, or not the solution, but the quasi-solution that, well, the British are withdrawing, so they're sort of out of the picture. But the Zionist community, the Jewish community there, their solution to this problem was to ethnically cleanse or expel the Palestinians living in the territories beyond just what the United Nations was proposing. These areas here, the actual, what ends up becoming the ceasefire lines, cuts very deeply into all of this area, becomes Israel, and a lot of border changes. So the United Nations puts together this plan in 1947, which is largely unworkable. The announcement of the partition of the land, and essentially going along with that is the idea that tens of thousands of Palestinians are going to be expelled from their homelands in the Sea of Galilee area up here, or the coastal plain. And so a civil war breaks out between the Jewish and Arab inhabitants of the Palestinian Mandate. And essentially, this is what the Palestinians call the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing, the expulsion of Palestinians from their traditional homelands. That begins in the fall of 1947. And when the British finally do withdraw their troops in May, the Arab states, the surrounding Arab states, intervened in theory to come to the defense of the Palestinians that were being driven out of their homes. But the states that were in existence at that time were largely British neo-colonial appendages, and were not really up to the job of not even inclined to defend the interests of Palestinians, let alone capable of doing so. So the Nakba is this period of 1947 to 1949, where all of that territory, right? These are the 1949 ceasefire lines. You can see this northern area has been completely seized, and a lot of the massacres and a lot of the atrocities take place in that N-shaped corridor, and especially in and around the Jerusalem area. So those areas that Israel sought to take over and make part of its state were systematically ethnically cleansed, a lot of times using exemplary violence, using terrorism tactics to try to create flight, panic, chaos, and get the Palestinians to flee and vacate that land for Israeli use. The next major kind of change, or in the map, when the lines on the map change again, comes in the 1960s, in the heyday of Arab nationalism, when Israel at this time, Egypt had a free officers' revolution, had a nationalist revolution in which a dynamic, powerful leader by the name of Gamal Abdel Nasser came to power, who Israel considered to be threatening. And in the tensions of the 1960s, Israel went to war in 1967 against both Egypt and its allied state in Syria, and sort of Jordan, although that wasn't a really dynamic actor. And over the course of 6 days in 1967, the Israelis captured, gained control, occupied all of, this is the so-called Green Line, the state of Israel, but Israeli forces occupied the whole of what was supposed to be the Palestinian state, occupied the Golan Heights, which is part of Syria, and occupied the Sinai Peninsula between Israel and Egypt. So this was Egypt, this was, at the time, it was Jordan, and this was Syria. Still is Syria, although Israel claims it. So since 1967, this land was traded back in the 1970s as part of the peace agreement between Egypt and Israel. Part of the terms of that was negotiated in the 1970s was giving back the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. But since June 6th of 1967, all of this territory has been under Israeli control. So it's been kind of one quasi-state under a single political authority since 1967, although what I'm going to talk about now are some efforts to revive that original United Nations notion of a two-state solution. So that two-state solution, very slow in materializing, or the international diplomacy and negotiations around setting that up were long delayed, but eventually do get off the ground in the 1990s. And it was really not a sincere or a good faith effort to reach anything like a final status or an equitable solution. What the United States mediating between at this time was the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the State of Israel. The United States trying to mediate between the Israelis and Palestinians. What the United States was able to negotiate or broker was this sort of interim agreement that really is an incoherent map. What you can kind of see on this map is that this is the so-called Green Line, or the 1949 ceasefire borders, and the areas in green are under full Palestinian control. The areas in light green are under the control of a joint security force, the Israeli, basically the Palestinian Liberation Organization, renamed the Palestinian Authority, essentially, in my view, sold out its historic mission and obligations, and began collaborating with Israel to maintain security. That's what's happening right now in Jenin, for example, where the Palestinian Authority is collaborating with the Israeli forces to basically expel Palestinians from, or invade, attack Palestinians in Jenin and areas in Tokram and other areas in the northern part here. So it's a kind of a Swiss cheese of a sliced and diced territory, and all of these purple dots represent Israeli settlements that are, there are border walls that are encircling all of these Palestinian communities. They're dotted with hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers living in this territory, controlling the roads, controlling the checkpoints, controlling the land, controlling the taxes, controlling everything. Same situation in the southern part in the Gaza Strip down here. Basically, all of it, it's under Palestinian control, but up until 2005, there were extensive Israeli settlements in the Palestinian lands. That was obviously, for I would think obvious reasons, was not a workable solution for the majority of the Palestinians. This is when the Palestinian Authority was seen to be betraying the historical mission and cause of Arab nationalism and Palestinian national self-determination. So this was not a workable solution by any stretch of the imagination, but it's kind of where things, the lines on the map in any case, have been frozen. The next slide here, I think, sort of illustrates why that Oslo solution, that two-state peace process that never really led to anywhere sort of decisive or final, the peace process acted as a kind of like cover for the ever-expanding settlement of Israeli settlers moving into the Palestinian territories, displacing Palestinians. And as this graph here on the right, I think, shows, it really is, in one sense, one political authority ruling over the entirety of the space, but it's divided up into these four different sort of chunks where Palestinians living in each one of these different spheres has a slightly different set of constraints and encumbrances to work under. So this is not a Palestinian state. It's not a road to a Palestinian state. It is a occupation of the entirety of historical Palestine. This whole area is historical Palestine, and all of it has been under Israeli control since 1967. Again, since the 1990s, they, offloaded or some of that, they basically got the Palestinian Authority to provide some local muscle to uphold the Israeli occupation of the entirety of the Palestinian traditional homelands. Okay, I know that was a lot of maps to go through quickly, and I know we have some time for questions and answers at the end. And my email, I believe, in all of the materials is easy enough to find. I'm very happy to talk by Zoom or any other format about any of the sort of complicated or the details of the history at any time. I just wanted to kind of lay down some of the basic geography in case any of us in the audience are new to the topic, and just kind of getting geographically oriented. So I know that was a lot of information quickly, but hopefully the idea of how we arrived at where we are, at least hopefully you get some of the main ideas. Now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about some of the more recent events. And this slide should be deeply ironic and maybe misnamed, or maybe there should be a question mark at the end of this, the end of the U.S.-Israeli alliance, because the United States and Israel seem to be, close allies to this day. And but I think that the closeness between the United States and Israel, especially under Biden, and at least in the theatrics under Donald Trump, it appears that the United States and Israel are still, close allies. I think there's been a great deal of geopolitical tension in that relationship that's been going back decades. And I think that's what's coming to the fore right now, is that the United States and Israel are moving in different directions. And my sense is that this U.S. is not going to be forever. Israel has always existed at the mercy of the United States. Like, without U.S. backing, Israel doesn't exist. It can't operate its war machine. It can't build and defend its settlements. Israel is always dependent on the United States. And I think the era of U.S. unconditional support for Israel is time limited. I don't think it's going to persist forever. Maybe that's an optimistic thought, but here's why I think that. I think that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu comes from the far right of the Israeli political spectrum. The whole thing's on the right, but the far right of the right is represented by Benjamin Netanyahu, who is a scion of the Israeli settler movement, of the Likud, the far right movement. He was first prime minister in the 1990s, and he advocated this idea of basically getting the United States to topple all of Israel's regional foes. So Benjamin Netanyahu and his advisors had the idea that he would get the United States to go to war against Iraq, and then after that they would overthrow Iraq, and then they'd overthrow Syria, and then they'd overthrow Iran, and then they'd overthrow, those are the big ones, right? Basically, Netanyahu's strategy is to get the United States to overthrow all of the regional challengers to Israel's position. And Netanyahu and his allies were at the forefront of basically manipulating, according to, say, this book. I think this is a very important book that was published in 2006 called The Israel Lobby and American Foreign Policy by two of the most eminent practitioners. These are not leftists. These are not Palestinian solidarity activists whatsoever. University of Chicago is Walt, and Mearsheimer is at Harvard or something. They're very prominent, very mainstream proponents of the international relations theory of realism. And they believe that the United States was dragged into a war in Iraq in 2003 that was contrary to American national interest, that this was basically Israel manipulating the American political system to fight its battles for it. And I think Mearsheimer and Walt, being very prominent, very sort of highly regarded, opened the door to a new sort of security paradigm that said the United States relationship with Israel is not an asset, but a liability. That this set of entangling alliances the United States has entertained with Israel has worked to undermine America's position in the world, American moral credibility, that this has been a major strategic debacle. And they point to all of the chaos that flew from the Iraq war and then the Syria war, and the sort of endless effort that the Israelis are doing to try to get the United States to go to war against Iran. And so I think the Mearsheimer and Walt vision of the world is very much, not the dominant view in Washington, but I'm going to show you a little clip in a minute here that's going to suggest that the soundness, the logical soundness of the Mearsheimer and Walt analysis is becoming too obvious to ignore, and that the Mearsheimer and Walt view of the world, I think, is becoming more widely viewed, right? Okay, so that's why I think the United States and Israel are kind of have different security and international relations interests. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is actually considered too radical and too corrupt and a clown, and he was voted out of office after a short term in 1999, but he came back in 2008, and he came back right at the same time that Barack Obama was elected president. not a huge Obama fan, but in this case, he plays kind of an important role. Benjamin Netanyahu grew up in Philadelphia. I mean, straight up, he's a racist. Like he has issues with color, and he really does not like Barack Obama. Barack Obama did, before he was a mainstream politician, he did have connections to the Palestinian community in Chicago, Rashid Khalidi. There's pictures of him meeting with Edward Said. He did have some community ties to the Islamic and the Muslim and the Arab world. And Netanyahu, it's a longer story, but he's an out and out racist against Ethiopian Jews. He has an issue with race. He does not like Barack Obama at all. And so when Barack Obama came into office, elected in November of 2008, and what we're going to see here is that Israel creates these international crises in order to manipulate the American political system. So Netanyahu was reelected prime minister in 2008 and has remained the prime minister other than a brief window in 2021. He stepped down for a few months, but he's been the prime minister since 2008, almost uninterrupted. And so he came to power basically at the same time that Barack Obama was being inaugurated. And Israel waged one of its most ferocious campaigns of aerial bombardments against Gaza in December of 2008 into January of 2009. And it's my belief, my theory of the case, is that this was very much designed to hem Barack Obama's options in, basically to get he's picking his cabinet, he's formulating his foreign policy. And so the Israelis call this creating facts on the ground that Barack Obama has to deal with. And so I really think the timing of the war, the Israeli war on Gaza in 2008, 2009, was very strategically timed to undermine Barack Obama. Here's what I should say about this. Barack Obama came into office with this kind of like new viewpoint. He came in very much, he was elected because he called the Iraq War a dumb war, because he wanted to reset U.S. relations in the Middle East. He wanted to negotiate a lasting peace with Iran. He recognized that the Iraq War was a major strategic debacle that drew the United States in. He wanted to kind of like course correct from the sort of rabid neo-colonial, neoconservative agenda of the Bush years. He wanted to kind of reset American foreign policy in the Middle East, and Netanyahu doesn't want that kind of reset. And so the war on Gaza in 2008, I think, can be understood as an effort to undermine Barack Obama's efforts to I wish I could say that he believed sincerely in, Palestinian rights or whatnot, but I think the strategic view of people like Mearsheimer and Walt is that the United States should be focused on what they call near-peer competitors, Iran and Russia. Should be focused on China and Russia, rather than getting drawn into endless conflicts in the Middle East. So basically, Barack Obama is trying to extricate the United States from the region, or at least change the pattern a bit. And he makes a speech at Al-Azhar, one of the oldest institutions of higher learning, in June of 2009. Historically speaking, it's not a totally faithful representation of U.S. history in the region, basically saying it's a tepid statement, but it's a statement that says we want to reset relations with the Muslim world. We don't want to be locked in this enmity, that has existed since the Iranian Revolution of 1979 or after. So Obama makes an important speech in Cairo, trying to open it, and here he is at Al-Azhar. Yeah, you can even, Hillary Clinton with the head covering. He's trying to sort of change the pattern a bit. And a big part of what Obama wants to do is what eventually becomes a peace, not a peace agreement, but an agreement around the Iranian nuclear program. He wants to forge a new agreement with Iran, and Israel is fully against that. Israel has been trying to get the United States to go to war with Iran, not a form of a peace agreement. And so it's really in the midterms, again, the electoral calendar is key. The biggest war, the biggest massacre of Israelis against Palestinians in Gaza before the 2023 war was this one in 2014. And that, I think, is, again, timed by the American electoral calendar. The idea was to try to influence American elections and to, kind of create an issue that pro-Israeli and Republicans can use against Democrats to try to undermine this burgeoning rapprochement, or kind of a warming of relations between the United States and Iran. Netanyahu really crossed the Rubicon in March of 2015 when he came to the U.S. Congress and gave a very sort of controversial and very strident speech where he basically aligned the state of Israel with the Republican Party. And came out very strongly against the United States forming this agreement with Iran and really tried to sabotage that agreement the best that he could. Barack Obama was able, the more realists within the Obama administration were eventually able to forge that agreement. Yeah, Dr. Navarez?
I'm so sorry. We have to go into break soon, so I just wanted to give a gentle warning, a reminder on that.
Okay, then in that case, what I'll do is, so I think the carnage is part of what drives the drift between the United States and Israel. Okay, so the last thing I'll do is I will post this image here. Let's see what happens. Can you still see my screen? Okay, this will be the last thing.
Syria, and you may actually hear from grown-up reporters who are lying through their teeth or ignorant beyond imagining that, oh, the war in Syria, yes, Russia intervened in Syria. Well, do you know that that Obama asked the CIA to overthrow the Syrian government starting 4 years before Russia intervened? What kind of nonsense is that? And how many times did the New York Times report on Operation Timber Sycamore, which was the presidential order to the CIA to overthrow Bashar al-Assad? 3 times in 10 years. This is not democracy. This is a game. And it's a game of narrative.
You can hear.
Why did the U.S. invade Iraq in 2003? Well, first of all, it was completely phony pretenses. It wasn't, oh, we were so wrong. They didn't have weapons of mass destruction. They actually did focus groups in the fall of 2002 to find out what would sell that war to the American people. Abe Schultze, if you want to know the name of the PR genius. They did focus groups on the war. They wanted the war all the time. They had to figure out how to sell the war to the American people, how to scare the shit out of the American people. It was a phony war. Where did that war come from? You know what? It's quite surprising. That war came from Netanyahu, actually. You know that? It's weird. And the way it is that Netanyahu had from 1995 onward the theory that the only way we're going to get rid of Hamas and Hezbollah is by toppling the governments that support them. That's Iraq, Syria, and Iran. And the guy's nothing if not obsessive. And he's still trying to get us to fight Iran this day, this week. He's a deep, dark son of a bitch, sorry to tell you, because he's gotten us into endless wars. And because of the power of all of this in the U.S. politics, he's gotten his way. But that war was totally phony. So what is this democracy versus dictatorship? Come on. These are not even sensible terms.
Okay, so what you can see there is that Donald Trump posted that, basically Professor Jeffrey Sachs calling Netanyahu a deep, dark son of a bitch on January 7th, 2025, as part of his pressure to make Israel agree to Hamas's ceasefire. And so I think the only reason that happened is because of this strategic estrangement between the United States and Israel. Obviously, that's a bigger story than we have a lot to talk about, so I'll be happy to take any questions on that in the Q&A or the panels. Thank you very much for offering me your attention for my talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We're going to go on a quick 5-minute break, so we will be back at 6:15, and now it's going to be 4 minutes, but we'll be back at 6:15. Thanks.
Suffer the Nakba, Sabra, Shatila, and Rabba. My people have died a million times in the struggle, so they rise from the tide like a post. They got himself in the eye of a refugee who rather die martyred than live like on the sea. So with another line, from the river to the sea, and from the Rhine to the sea, Palestine will be free. To appreciate life when you
Okay, thank you everyone for your patience and understanding through this. We are going to continue now, and I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Feroze Sidhwa, a trauma surgeon, educator, and advocate who brings firsthand experience working in a hospital in Gaza. Dr. Sidhwa wrote a widely impactful New York Times op-ed titled 65 Doctors, Nurses, and Paramedics, What We Saw in Gaza.
Hey, thanks. You guys can hear me okay? Yeah, cool. So I don't want to take up too much time just because I think a Q&A session is always more useful. But so I'll just I'm just gonna talk about the framework with which I think people should understand the conflict. And I'll just correct one thing. that Brandon said, and I don't think he'll disagree with me in the correction. Just he said, and I don't think he meant it literally, that Israel can't exist without the United States support. That's not literally true. Israel certainly can exist as a normal country without the United States pouring arms and weapons and all sorts of other insanity into it. What it can't do is exist as this expansionist Spartan lunatic state that it's become, trying to kill everything in front of it and just go on about its existence in that way. Without the support of the United States, Israel would become a normal country, and it would have to interact with its neighbors in a normal way instead of just through violence. And that's I think that kind of segues into the framework that I want people to try and understand about the U.S.-Israel relationship. When people talk about the Israel lobby or any of these other things, they're not wrong. Like Mearsheimer and Walt are both intelligent people, and they have a long history of good academic scholarship on this topic and others. But the framework is incomplete, in my opinion. It's not accurate to say that Israel is committing crimes in Gaza. The U.S. and Israel are conspiring together to commit crimes in Gaza. And in my opinion, that's why we should care about it. I'm not Palestinian. I'm not Jewish. I'm not Arab. I'm not Muslim. I'm not Christian. Although you can keep going down the list of things that I'm not. I don't have any connection to the eastern part of the Mediterranean where Israel-Palestine is. But I'm an American, and it's my money, my diplomatic support, my weapons, et cetera, that's going to fueling these crimes, not just in Gaza, but in Palestine generally, and actually in the Middle East quite generally. And there's a reason for that. You might ask, well, why? Why is the U.S. doing this? Well, there's pretty good reasons. After World War II, the U.S. had taken over basically the entire world as parts of it started to get out of control slowly, like China was the first major bloc. But the Middle East has been recognized as basically the most important part of the world to control ever since the end of World War II. Mostly because of the oil, but also because of its strategic space, the fact that it's basically oriented right in the middle, or located right in the middle of Asia, and right between Asia and Africa and Europe. It's a very, very strategically important place. Well, in 1950, I think maybe 1955, the Eisenhower administration, Eisenhower was the general who won the European part of World War II, and then afterwards he was elected president. And Eisenhower went to Indonesia, large Muslim country, the biggest Muslim country in the world at the time, and actually, and now too, actually, I believe. And he when he came back, he told the National Security Council there was a campaign of hatred against us there, and he said it didn't come from the government. He said it came from the people, and I saw it everywhere, and I don't understand it. What's going on? So the National Security Council went and did a study. And they came back and they said, it's all Russia. It's Russian influence. And he said, no, that's ridiculous. I didn't see a Russian when I was there. Nobody was speaking Russian. No one's talking about communism. They just really didn't like us. So go find that. He didn't buy that answer. He said, this is nonsense. So he came back. So the National Security Council then actually looked into it. And they came back and the document's declassified, so you can read it if you want to. They came back and they said, and it's worth thinking about for a minute. They said, in Indonesia, but this generalizes to the Middle East. I know Indonesia is not in the Middle East, but it generalizes to the Middle East as well. In Indonesia, there's a perception that the United States supports dictators and blocks democracy and development. I'm quoting. And furthermore, that we do this because we want to control the region's resources and its strategic space. And then the National Security Council study goes on to say it's going to be hard to counter that perception because it's accurate. It's correct. That's exactly what we do in Indonesia. And furthermore, that's what we should do in Indonesia because we just conquered the entire world in World War II and we'll do what we like. Well, that's their way of looking at the world. I don't subscribe to it. Probably most of you don't either. And neither do most Americans. Most Americans are not in favor of such things, as you can see from the parts of the Trump phenomenon. Well, but that is the operative way that the U.S. looks at the Middle East. Okay, well, yeah, we want to control the world by force because obviously you can't allow a democracy in the Middle East. If you did, the U.S. would be thrown out of the Middle East in 5 minutes. Nobody's going to agree to allow American corporations to control the most valuable resource in the world. In fact, in the history of the world, oil is a tremendously important resource, and have all the profits from it flow to Western energy corporations instead of flowing to the societies that desperately need it for development and development of democracy. Well, so, okay, fine. You have to, that's pretty obvious. If you want to control the oil of the Middle East, you're going to have to continue controlling in the whole Middle East by force. Well, Israel is a very useful asset in doing that. It's not, you just got to remember, it's not Israeli planes. It's U.S. planes dropping U.S. bombs flown by Israeli pilots. The bulldozers that Israel used to demolish half of Gaza and is using to demolish the West Bank as well, and has been for, for about 50, almost 60 years now, actually, since 1967, they're made in Indiana. They're not made in Israel. Helicopters are not made in Israel. It's true that the drone technology is made in Israel, but if you want to look at it seriously, almost all of the money for the development has come from the United States. In fact, Israeli Military Industries, IMI, it's like a quasi-private, quasi-governmental, it's a private-public partnership in Israel that develops most of Israel's military industry. Its management headquarters isn't even in Israel. It's in Washington, D.C., because they know where the money comes from. It's just perfectly obvious. So these two systems, the U.S. and Israel, especially in their militaries, are very, very tightly linked. It's almost silly to think of them as separate things. So I think it's a little bit dangerous to think of the Israelis as manipulating the United States into doing things in the Middle East. It's my view that it's actually the other way around. It's true that the lobby does have an impact. The lobby has a major impact when it comes to the Palestinians because the U.S. doesn't care about the Palestinians. It doesn't care what happens to them one way or another. They might as well be ants. Just it's not interesting to U.S. power because they have no power. They don't control any resources. They don't control any land. What difference does it make? Pardon me. It's true that they can carry out violence here or there, maybe, but that's a minor concern for state planners. When it comes to things like Iran, though, just as Brandon said, the lobby totally falls out the window. They can't force the U.S. to, say, attack Iran or do any other such thing, even though the lobby's been trying for 10, 15 years at this point. The U.S. is not supporting Israel and arming it to the teeth and blocking every attempt by the international community to rein it in and blocking every sanction, blocking every Security Council resolution, et cetera, because it wants Israel to just be bigger that's not the case at all. It wants a Spartan state that is dependent 100% on the United States. And it's recognized how valuable that's going to be since 1971. In 71, Brandon mentioned the 1967 war between Israel and the Arab states, but primarily Egypt. And Israel conquered the Sinai Peninsula, that big V-shaped part of Egypt that he showed that under Israeli occupation. In 1971, the leader of Egypt, Gamal Nasser, had died, and he'd been replaced by a guy named Anwar Sadat. Sadat went to Israel and he offered Israel a full peace treaty in return for for Israeli troops withdrawing from the Sinai Peninsula, which would then be demilitarized. And that would have ended the international conflict. The Israeli cabinet considered the proposal, and they knew it was serious. They thought, okay, this is a serious proposal, and they rejected it. And they rejected it for a very clear reason. It was very obvious why. The U.S. will support us in rejecting it. The U.S. will allow us to continue using force to control the Sinai. And there was an Israeli general who's he's passed away, but he's a very famous guy. If you ever see an Israeli general with an eye patch on, that's him. His name was Moshe Dayan. He famously said, I prefer Sharm el-Sheikh without peace to peace without Sharm el-Sheikh. Sharm el-Sheikh was a town at the southern edge of the Sinai Peninsula. So that's the operative thing. At that point, Israel chose expansion over security. And the only reason they can do that, exactly like Brandon said, they can't, they're not that powerful. It's a small country. It's not a big place. They cannot do these things without the full backing of the United States. And the United States is not doing it to help Israel. It's doing it to help itself. Sorry, I have this cough that just won't go away. But leaving that aside, what Israel has done to Gaza and has pretty much gotten away with, because again, we don't have a functioning democratic system in our own country. It's very scary. This could become a model for how to deal with unwanted populations anywhere in the world. It's clearly already the model for the West Bank. But even if you're not interested in the Palestinians at all, I mean, just don't care for whatever, this or that reason. If this model or system or whatever you want to call it, this craziness that Israel has done to Gaza with our full support and help over the past, say, 15, 16 months, if this is exported to India, Now you're talking about 250 million Muslims that the Indian Hindu fascist government is just fanatically in hatred of for some kind of a bizarre thing. If they start implementing these same types of systems, driving people out of their homes, massive, widespread destruction, enormous level of killing, especially of children, people are going to flee, and they're going to flee to Pakistan. You start doing these huge refugee movements, you're talking about possibly starting a nuclear war between India and Pakistan. You started a nuclear war between India and Pakistan, the whole world will be destroyed. Quite literally. We will all die. These are very, very scary things. So I just want people to understand that the way you should think about the conflict is the role that we have in it. And I don't think Brandon was trying to say otherwise, but the role that we have in it is driving violence and more violence and more violence, because that suits what our planners and our leaders, if you want to call them that, that's what they perceive to be in their interest, or the interest of their rich friends, perhaps. But we don't have to accept that. We absolutely don't, and I don't think we should. So if I know that's not really you guys probably wanted to hear about my time in the hospitals in Gaza, which I'm happy to talk about. But since it's a lot of, I think, younger students on the call, it's probably best if people get some way of understanding having a baseline understanding of how the conflict works.
Thank you so much, Dr. Feroze, for your time and for um your information that you shared with us. We truly appreciate you being here tonight. Now we're gonna move on to our panelist Q&A. Yes, he's going to be helping me ask these questions. And so we're going to hear from a diverse of organizations working for justice in Palestine. And I'm gonna have each panelist introduce themselves, and each organization is going to share their mission statement and a bit about of their work that they do before we jump into our Q&A session. And so before we begin with the introductions, I do want to introduce Refugees for Success. They were not able to join us tonight, but they did share some information for us to share. And so I'm going to go ahead and read their mission statement. If you would like to learn more, we are going to have their QR code for you to contact them through their Instagram. So Refugees for Success is a dedicated organization focused on empowering refugees as they build new lives in the United States. Their mission is to provide personalized mentorship and guidance to help refugees, particularly students, navigate the college application process. They offer workshops that focus on every step of applying to college, including guidance on filling out applications, crafting compelling personal statements, and understanding the financial aid and scholarship opportunities. Their goal is to ensure that refugee students have the resources and support they need to access higher education and achieve their academic aspirations. Through mentorship and targeted workshops, Refugees for Success aims to open doors to education and create lasting opportunities for success. So we're gonna go ahead and I'll have the guest speakers reintroduce themselves. Dr. Wolfe-Hunnicut, historian and representative of FJP, followed by Dr. Feroze Sidhwa, trauma surgeon and humanitarian. Next, we're going to hear from Katarina Bieler, representing CV BIPOC. And finally, we'll hear from Jose Luis Lopez Ayala, representing SJP tonight. Dr. Brandon Wolfe-Hunnicut, we're going to start off with you.
Okay. You want me to focus on any one of these questions, or I guess what inspired to become involved in advocacy of Palestine?
We're going to start off with you just introducing yourself as a historian, and then also if you could talk about the work that Faculty for Justice in Palestine does and your mission statement.
Oh, Faculty for Justice of Palestine, we're just trying to We're just trying to generate some interest and some understanding and some compassion and some empathy, some understanding of what's going on in a part of the world that can seem very far away. And maybe doesn't relate directly, or people that can't necessarily draw the connections. So we want to be a support to Students for Justice in Palestine, which I think, right now, actually, at Columbia and Barnard and a bunch of universities are actually having a little bit of a resurgence this afternoon. So Students for Justice in Palestine, I think there's a strong case to be made for the activism that they did in the spring around the campus encampments. I think that led directly to the formulation of the peace framework that was announced in May. So it's our effort to sort of generate some interest in this area, which I think most people don't really know the conflict and don't really know how it relates to their lives and what they experience in the day-to-day. So that's, Faculty for Justice in Palestine. We're fledgling. We're just trying to get off the ground and trying to get some people interested and involved. My own kind of approach to it is I'm an educator and I, teach the history. So my thought is that I can offer some historical perspective wherever it's, welcome or needed. Should I say more?
Thank you so much. Dr. Feroze Sidhwa?
Yeah, so I don't really have an organization, but I went to Gaza with the work that I did there was with a medical association, the U.S. called the Palestinian American Medical Association, and then I actually worked with the World Health Organization on the ground. PAMA kind of like sent volunteers there, but then on the ground the work was at the WHO. And the WHO actually has two parts of its they don't really have a mission statement, I guess, but they do have a constitution that's been ratified by, I believe, every country in the world, including the U.S. and Israel, to be sure. And there's two interesting statements in it. One, and I can't quote them exactly from memory, but the first one is just that the fundamental or the highest attainable standard of health is the fundamental right of every human being, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, political affiliation, things like that. I think most people can agree with that without any difficulty. But there's a second part of the Constitution of the World Health Organization that I always found interesting, which the wording is something like the health of all peoples is fundamental to the attainment of peace and security, meaning international peace and security, and is dependent on the full cooperation of individuals and states. And I always, ever since I got my Master of Public Health, I thought that was an interesting way of looking at the world and a way of looking at what healthcare workers can do in the world. And not just healthcare workers. I mean, most health doesn't come from doctors and nurses. Most health comes from community. We all know the social determinants of health are far more important than what medicines or what surgeries I can do on you. And that's critically important. Health is a state of being. It's not the state of having access to a doctor or a nurse. So no, I've always thought that was a really for something that was written in the 1940s, I thought that was pretty far-reaching. In terms of what inspired me to become involved in advocacy for Palestine, I was a college freshman in 2000.
You said what? Sorry, before we dive into the questions, we'll move on to the next org. Thank you. Katarina Bieler.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Katarina Bieler, and I'm with CV BIPOC, which stands for Central Valley Black Indigenous People of Color Coalition. And if you had seen on Instagram a little panelist spotlight of us, I'll just read it. CV BIPOC is a coalition of organizers, organizations, and community members dedicated to the liberation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the Central Valley. By uniting grassroots organizations from across the region, CV BIPOC Coalition strengthens community connections and fights against injustice through collective actions. And this group was started years ago when, out of this smaller group called Blooms for Liberation, noticing that there were so many groups active and working on liberation and fighting for justice, but they were fragmented all over. So they really wanted to bring people together, and this is where we are today. So I'm happy to be here with you all.
Thank you. We'll have Jose Luis Lopez Ayala.
Yessi introduced SJP earlier, SJP in Stanislaus earlier. But I will say that to remind, SJP is a safe space for all students wanting to learn and advocate for Palestinian liberation. Of course, on State's campus, and also, SJP as a whole within all student communities.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for your introductions and again for the work that you all do. We are going to jump into our panelist discussion. We do have a series of questions that you see on your screen. Feel free, the panelists, our guest speakers, feel free to, you don't have to answer every questions, but you can jump in whichever question you would like to answer. So to start off with the first one, so every movement is driven by passion and personal commitment. What inspired you to become involved in advocacy for Palestine?
Does that start with me again?
Whoever would like to jump in.
Well, I'll throw out that I was transferring from Cabrillo Community College to UC Santa Cruz in the 2002-2003 time period. And at that time, the Iraq War, the impending Iraq War, was the major sort of overriding issue. And I became really interested in understanding why the United States was involved. And I did my dissertation research on the relationship between the oil lobby on the one side and the Israel lobby on the other, and how those two forces kind of shaped American foreign policy. And so I kind of got into Palestinian advocacy and concern for the history of the region through wanting to understand why the United States was involved in the way that it was. That dissertation became a book about U.S. foreign policy and oil in the region, and then I ended up teaching that history. So yeah, the Iraq War 2003 is how I became interested. Thanks.
So as somebody pretty young, I've never really been given the resources to like understand pretty much anything like worldwide, because it's always been just kind of like focus on yourself, focus on around you. But in my soon after October 7th, in my senior year, I had a ethnic studies professor who this was of course soon after October 7th, so he was like, "Hey, let's talk about the history of Israel Palestine." I think he phrased it like the history of Jews versus Arabs, and I was like, "That's crazy." But I remember him giving out like a packet of a bunch of honestly fully Israeli biased sources for history. And I wrote in like a Google document, like piece by piece, everything that I could research that came up with issues with all of this stuff. Because of course I knew a little bit, because I've always been involved in activist spaces, but it was piece by piece of a list, and I emailed him and I told him, hey, there are a lot of issues with the thing you're doing, and I don't think you should do this unit, because he wanted to do a unit, like an impromptu unit. I told him I don't think you should do this unit, and then like the day after, he said some students have a problem with what I was doing. We're gonna do one last lesson, but after that we can't do the unit. It's like he said it was controversial, and in that like one last lesson, he equated Hamas to the Nazis, which I thought was a really weird thing to say to a bunch of high schoolers who don't really know a lot. In especially in the Palestinian regard. So I thought that was really crazy. And, for someone like this of such a high degree to be so, I don't want to say uneducated, but definitely weird about something very serious, that inspired me to take it from my level as a young person and advocate for Palestine from there.
I'll go. Yeah, I mean, I didn't grow up in a Zionist home. I grew up in the Christian realm. However, growing up in the Reformed Church, they're not Zionists. But oddly, my mom was from her sister in Europe. And so I knew about Israel. I just thought Palestinians were bad, unfortunately, you know. And then when I was off in undergrad, after going to MJC, went to school in Iowa, and we had chapel because it was a small Christian liberal arts college. And two people came to spoke, Marlon and Sally Viss. I'll never forget them. They were living in Israel, Palestine, and they started sharing about Palestinians and their situation. And it just blew my mind. I went and talked to them afterwards. I was like, I didn't know. And so they got me connected with people when I moved back to California, to go listen. So I was in the Bay Area a lot, Central Valley person, going to the Bay Area to listen to these speakers like the guy who started Sabeel and Salim Munayir, who started Musalaha, Ministry of Reconciliation. And that's what started to change me. And then a trip came up on what's really going on in Israel, Palestine. It was a peace and reconciliation trip. So I went out for 5 weeks in 2010 already and completely changed me. And I, you know, got my family on board. My aunt in Switzerland isn't, unfortunately, but my mom is, and a lot of family members have, you know, grown a lot when it comes to what's actually happening in the Middle East. And I was fortunate to go back to Palestine after taking, it actually inspired me to get my master's degree in intercultural studies and Islamic studies. Took classes in Lebanon, jumped back into Palestine to go visit friends and see what was happening, and had lived in the Middle East as well. And Palestine has always, once you learn about Palestine, you can't not care, I feel, or at least I hope not. And, you know, having been back in 2010, the first time I was there, up in, you know, you're jumping 15 years ahead and it's just getting worse. It's really devastating. And so we have to continue to fight. So, and this is how I got involved with CB BIPOC, because they held a rally in October and I signed up and have been involved in October of 2020. Oh gosh, 2023 already. And so this is where we're continuing to do our advocacy for Palestine within CB BIPOC.
Thank you so much, Katarina. Now going on to this next question, being in such a conservative area like Turlock and a lot of the Central Valley, advocating for Palestine can be really challenging, especially when community views are shaped by political and cultural influences. These are hard conversations to have in these type of spaces. So the question here is, how do you approach advocacy for Palestine in conservative areas, especially within right-leaning communities?
I'll share something quick. So one of the things that after I had come back in 2010, I had heard from one of my friends that I had made out there, a Palestinian friend, that they were walking alongside the wall and protesting the wall on the West Bank. And so I said, well, I can do that here in Ripon, California, where I'm from. So my sister and I made signs and stood on a corner that was like one of the main exits off of Ripon. And I said, stop building the wall and free Palestine. I got a lot of honks that day. A lot of people thought I meant the wall at the border of Mexico and the US. And I was like, hey, we're against that wall too. So, but sometimes it really is, you have to, and we ended up getting, Ripon used to have a little, the Ripon Record come out once a week, more like a gossip rag. And, you know, the guy came out and took a picture and kind of did a blurb about us. But yeah, I mean, some people yelled, but I also understand too, being white, like I'm not super scared sometimes because I also know I have a place of privilege at times. And so I try to use it. And having grown up in the church, after I had gone on that trip the first time, I like went and spoke what really happened. I didn't hold back. And so they're really, and sometimes you have to get over any nervousness. You know, a lot of people see me today, I'm very loud about it. I'm very vocal. But that hasn't always been the case. I used to get too nervous to say anything. But, you know, when you have good people, like finding friends like CB BIPOC or SJP or people with Faculty for Justice in Palestine and other groups like that, finding like-minded people, that helps you continue the advocacy. in these conservative areas because you find community. And when you find love in that community and love for liberation for people, it really helps a lot in continuing to do the work.
That's a great sentiment. Thank you, Katerina. Might be ironic, but I did my PhD at Stanford, and before I came to Stan, that's where I was. And would you believe that it feels like a more less constrained space here? I mean, it's a very contentious issue with very sensitive, and a very dedicated apparatus to making sure that the discourse stays on a certain track. Whereas here, I don't really feel. I mean, I'm an educator, so I can teach my classes, and it's not nearly as contentious. Here, I feel like people are more indifferent or unaware, uninformed. Whereas in graduate school, people were very much sort of partisans of their various stances. And so I actually find it's easier to talk about the subject here than it was in my grad school days.
I 100% agree with you on that. Yeah, I actually find that in some ways it's easier to talk about it here than in Baltimore when I was doing my college, or Boston for residency, and Jersey for fellowship. Like, it's I don't think people have a hard time understanding. It's like Katerina said, when you actually explain to people what's going on and they don't already have a predetermined position, like Brandon mentioned, now they're kind of like, what are they doing? That doesn't sound good at all. I can't imagine supporting such a thing, because it's great. I mean, like Katerina, like you went to, I think you and I talked about it when we had dinner the other day. When you walk into Hebron's a city in the south of the West Bank where the apartheid system that the Israelis have set up in is like in your face, like it's impossible to ignore. When you walk in there and in 5 minutes, you're just like, there's something wrong here. I don't know what it is. I'm not, even if you've never read anything about the conflict, anybody can walk in there and instantly feel that there is something seriously wrong going on. And it's just not that hard to explain to people. And if they don't, I wouldn't, I mean, this is a conservative area in politics and whatever, but I think these terms can be a little bit misleading. This area is away from an ideological center like Stanford. And because of that, it's just, it doesn't matter that much what people think out here for US power. So, but that gives us an opportunity, because, if the powerful want to ignore this place, it doesn't mean we have to. Yeah.
One of the great things about Stan is there are no donors, Zionist or otherwise, to alienate. Right? We don't have to worry about like, oh no, they're saying something controversial in a history class because they don't give us any money anyway.
I'll share a little bit. I'm actually wanting to do my thesis on Palestine and how
Candice,
uh-huh.
sorry, we're gonna have a few minutes after the panelist Q&A for questions. So right now we're just gonna ask the panelists and the guest speakers but we're gonna have some time.
Okay.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone. So advocating for Palestine isn't really just about one region. We believe that it is part of a larger movement for justice. We hear other people fighting against oppression, colonialism, and human rights violations, and we recognize how the struggles are interconnected. So how does the Palestinian cause intersect with other global struggles for justice and human rights?
I'd say just in the way that I mentioned before, which is that it's actually the U.S. The United States is, by a huge margin, the world's worst human rights violator. That's not true within the boundaries of the country, obviously, but when you look at what the U.S. does in the world, it's and Palestine is certainly one of the worst examples, but it's hardly the only one. There's a lot of really, really bad stuff that the United States is responsible for, or taking advantage of, or making worse, or all three. And Palestine is just it's a really extreme example of that. So I think because it is an area where there's so much propaganda around it, there's so much misinformation, that if we're able to cut through that with people, we could probably reach people about almost anything. So I think that's in terms of the work that we can do on the I hate saying we work on the conflict, because we should be working on ourselves. Like, we should be working on what we do, the role that we play in the conflict. And when we understand it that way, it makes it I think easier for people to understand that we're advocating for ourselves to be better. Like, even if you don't care about the Palestinians at all, for just you're some kind of sadist or something, you should care that you're committing crimes. That matters to almost everybody. And honestly, sometimes it matters to conservatives more, because they they're religious people or whatever it might be. But yeah, no, I think that's the way I would think about how it intersects with other causes.
Yeah, I agree with that, and also brings up something. The tight sort of interlocking, the way like the U.S. military, especially military technology, and the Israeli military technology, and like, what does that mean for? I hate to say it, but when bombs are dropped in Gaza, it's actually not good, obviously not good, but U.S. stock market. And my 401k retirement is invested in all these funds. And so the fact that like we are profiting off death brings up the, that fundamental kind of moral issue. And another way I think that it kind of, it intersects with other global issues is it's kind of a similar analogous, border walls on the US southern border and border walls around Gaza. I think they're pretty much should be understood in the same kind of paradigm, that these are struggles over resources. What happens when access to, the sustenance of life and safe, clean drinking water becomes limited, and, societies become more and more rabid and violent in trying to control what's left. And so you can almost see what's happening in Gaza, the way that, not just Gaza, but in the West Bank. This is a resource conflict. This is basically trying to monopolize and gain control over water and arable lands. And so it's similar. I mean, I think it's it can be understood in a similar way, in the way that the way that some people want to build up militarized borders between the U.S. and Mexico. It's the same kind of thing. It's trying to control people, cage people to better exploit the lands. And so I think there's something very sort of there's an echo or a rhyme between the border wall that they're trying to construct in the United States and the various walls they're constructing in Israel. And so I think they're, even if it's more of a rhyme, but I think they are connected that way.
Just to add one thing to that real quick, what Brandon said about, the bombs are made here, right? So somebody bought them and sent them over to Israel to drop on children. But the somebody, we might think of a conservative, and I don't know that many people would actually say this out loud, but they might say, well, good, I want my stocks to go up. But you can also explain to them that this is just a mechanism by which you subsidize Lockheed Martin. That has nothing to do with, maybe your stock goes up a few pennies or something, but there's the transfer of wealth. There's actually a study of the British Empire, which looked at it on like kind of a class basis, but it asked, did the British gain or lose money from the empire, leaving aside the morality of it? And they found that it was basically a wash. The British government didn't really gain, or the British society didn't really gain or lose. It basically broke even with the empire in general. But what it did find is that the poorest paid the costs and the wealthiest gained the rewards. And the exact same thing is going on here. It's not, and again, when you point that out to somebody like, yeah, but you gave money to the US government, the US government gave it to Lockheed Martin, and Lockheed Martin gave Israel a bomb. That's the chain. It doesn't, and they're like, oh yeah, that does suck for me too.
I mean, I kind of always see this question and say, like, how does it not? I think it's a very American mindset to ask, well, how does it affect me? I think when you look at what's been happening to Palestine, especially since October 2023, you see how the world's rallied around Palestine. But I think it's here in the US that we don't get it. We can't see people, and I'm not saying particularly the people in this group here, I'm saying kind of our mindset. We're very individual. Our individualism, our materialism, our capitalism affects how we see everyone and everything, and how those things don't matter to us, because, hey, we need that resource, right? Like, how many people are caring about what's going on in the Congo right now? Because Tesla, our iPhones, if you have an Apple, you know, the cobalt that they are extracting, they're using child labor, you know, and so you have to, would you want your children to be trafficked into doing child labor? Would you yourself want to be in that situation? So that's how I always view everything. Do unto others as you would want done unto you. And while, you know, and that has something that's like embedded so deeply inside of me. And I think that really is a heart change for a lot of people, where you have to see yourself in another person. You know, you can use all the cliches, all the sayings of like walk a mile in someone else's shoes or anything like that. But I think especially when I'm thinking about Palestinian and the indigenous people of the Americas, they get each other. They've been supporting each other. They've, you know, when the Hurricane Milton was hitting Palestinian in Gaza, a psychologist had said he's praying for the people who are in Hurricane Milton's way. Here they are with our bombs dropping on them, our bullets shooting children in the head, and yet they're thinking about us. And so I think like we need to very much, I think when you start to look at Israel-Palestine and you start to look at global injustice, you really have to look at the United States and what's your patriotism? Why do you not want to care? I think it takes a lot of work on yourself. And then you start to see how everything intersects, you know. Our bombs dropping in Gaza, that's affecting the United States military is the largest emitters of greenhouse gases. You know, again, we're affecting global warming so much too. So you start to see the connections of everything. And hey, I breathe the same air as people are breathing. So that right there is just, you intersect in all these ways. The ocean, you know, how many people are using the Pacific Ocean? So yeah, we can't look at ourselves individually. We have to look at ourselves globally and communally.
Thank you, guys. We're gonna go ahead and skip on to the next question. Let me make sure.
So our next question is, what are some advocacy tools and resources that your organization uses to further your activism for Palestine?
So, SJP at Stan, we obviously have some events like this one, and we have resources and informationals like in person on campus. But in our Instagram, on everywhere you can find us, we have a link tree where we have like guides and information, like guides for BDS and information and links to important like resources and people and fundraisers to advocate financially. And we have all these resources and we collect and we have an ever growing link tree because the nature of advocacy is that it never stops and information keeps growing. So we have this as a really good resource for our people and everyone to use. And I think that is something that many organizations can use because it's a nice way to organize and organize information.
With CV BIPOC, I mean, we have a lot of followers on Instagram and Facebook. And so that is one tool that we use to be posting, but also to let people know about rallies and protests. But, you know, rallies and protests are good. You know, you meet people, that can really help with advocating for places and things. But our resources can sometimes be as simple as utilizing somebody's house to go and, you know, maybe for example, I know people will get together. I know Sacramento is very involved with there's so many Palestinian groups there, pro-Palestine groups, and they'll like get together and create things that they sell so that they can raise funds for either a family or a cause there. So these are the types of things we can do too. I know we have been working together as well from Bakersfield all the way with groups in Sacramento and the Bay Area. And so like one of our resources is to be able to connect across such a huge region and getting to talk about what each other are doing and promoting each other, getting to know about families in Gaza, and what other things that we can be doing for Palestine.
Thank you. We can go on to our next question. So we do know that when you're advocating, it always comes with its own set of struggles, whether it's dealing with opposition, feeling drained, experiencing burnout, that's really common, or facing resistance. What challenges have you faced as an advocate, and how do you stay resilient in your work?
I think the challenges are the usual ones, ignorance, apathy. Those are they're difficult to overcome, but the way the way I stay resilient is I just remember what other people are having to deal with is way worse than what we have to. So, which when you're tired and you're frustrated and you're pissed off, that's not much comfort to me. We've all thrown our hands up in the air at some point and said, "Oh, screw it," that happens. Come back to it tomorrow. This is definitely a marathon. The suppose we free Palestine tomorrow, right? Not going to, obviously, but suppose we did. There's plenty of other problems to work on too. So just keep your nose down to the grindstone. When you need to come up for air, come up for air. And to take a minute. There's plenty of people who don't work on these things full time, or with all the time that they have, who can still be an outlet for you. Like they may not know if you go to them and say, "Oh, did you read this news story and that news story and that news story?" They'll say, "No, I didn't," because I don't know what the hell you're talking about. But but they can still understand your frustration. It's so yeah, no, talk to your friends, talk to your family, let frustration out when it's there, and then get back to it the next day or the next week. That's all I could think of.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think, it can be overwhelming when you look at the totality of things. It'd be overwhelming. And so I think kind of breaking things down into discrete, one step at a time, one day at a time, focus on the immediate task at hand. What's if you think about how long the journey is or whatnot, it's, it can be demoralizing. And so just kind of think journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And so just take one step after the other. And, as Feroze said, others are dealing with, you look at these people that are taking their master's exams in the rubble of their, in Gaza, and they're like studying advanced physics in, absolute, just total destruction. And so I think, when you kind of see that kind of thing, it puts whatever minor issue you're having with exhaustion in a different perspective.
Thank you. Oh, just yeah, but when Dr. Feroze was saying to just remembering what other people are going through, that definitely helps me continue because there are days where I just want to throw my hands up in the air with anything, but I think about like our Black brothers and sisters in the United States and our Indigenous brothers and sisters when I'm thinking about things that are going on in the US and I'm just like pissed and nothing's ever going to change. I'm like, no, but they've had to keep going. So who am I to just stop? But you also have to recognize when your mental health is being affected, if you're burning out, and I think that is a challenge, get on meds if you need to get on meds. I think that has helped a lot. I'll say personally for me, I don't mind talking about that. Finally finding like a good medicine regimen has really helped me continue on and not feel so doomsday every day. Another thing is finding good community. And I really have to say community has been key for me, because otherwise you think you're on an island by yourself and it's too overwhelming to look at everything going on in Palestine, but even in the US and in Congo and Sudan and Yemen and everywhere else in the world. And, we're not saviors, but what we can do is be human and come together, but doing that by finding some good people so that you can lean on, that you can even have fun with. And I keep resilient in my work too by gardening. That helps a lot. Finding something you enjoy and doing that.
Thank you. We'll
And
move
yeah.
on to go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think what Katerina said is really important. Like for me, I interact with people socially in my work and in my advocacy, and that's basically it. And when your advocacy actually becomes part of your social life, like I don't know if anybody reads old anarchist tracts like I do, but the integration of work and social life is a major tenet of anarchist thinking, and I'm not talking about people breaking windows in banks or something, but of anarchist or anarcho-socialist thinking. And I think the same thing kind of applies here. When you end up having a social life that is largely centered around activism, it just becomes natural, and it's less of a burden on you to say, or maybe you can think of it that way. Like it's less of a mental burden, like, oh crap, I have to think about Palestine today. It's like, no, we're going to get together about coffee, and what else are we going to talk about, So it's and yeah, but yeah, no, everybody's got you can't just be on all the time. You just not, it's just not possible. And you have to forgive yourself for taking a step back. It seems everything that we deal with is so petty and ridiculous compared to what the Palestinians have to deal with, even what like Katerina said, excuse me, with what people of color in the United States deal with generally. It is, but it's nevertheless, we all have our own limits, and when you reach them, take a break.
Thank you. And I know earlier Katarina talked a little bit about her experience with backlash, so we'll move on to the last question. What advice do you have on how to encourage others to partake in solidarity?
To start small because telling my friends about stuff is like one of the, well, obviously, like Dr. Sidhwa brought up, if it becomes a part of you socially and it's just so natural, to be able to tell my friends and they tell their friends and they tell other people, starting at so small can grow really big, in terms of like, keeping each other safe and how to deal with things, because like has been brought up, community is really key to a lot of things.
Um, what with backlash, I mean, I think expecting it is just good, knowing that it can happen, and it can happen from the weirdest moments as well. We've had that happen actually here at Stan State. Or people that it was unexpected from. I think posturing yourself in a way that you can practice with friends, I think too, like what you're going to say. Because I know people get really nervous, like, well, I don't know what to say if someone comes up to me. I'm like, that's okay. You're not always going to know what to say, but practicing. And so we even just doing a little bit of role playing sometimes can help when people are going to be, at a protest or speaking up about it. but trying is good. You know, Palestinians, they love whenever anybody mentions Palestine, when they're there for them in any way, shape, or form, even if it's just wearing the keffiyeh or having a little Palestinian flag. I mean, those are ways too that you can get backlash for that, but even when you like don't know a language of someone, but you're trying a few words, people appreciate it. So just know that the haters will always be there, but you just got to try, and it's okay if you're not ready for everything right away. Like I said, this has been a journey for myself. People always see me where I'm at right now, but you didn't know me in high school when my heart was thumping like crazy to have to speak in front of people and didn't know. And even though I cared about stuff, I didn't know how to talk about it. Whereas like here, I'm like, oh, I thought in front of 1,000 people, whatever, it doesn't even matter to me anymore. I can talk and talk about whatever. Those people might inspire you, but just remember they started somewhere too. And not everyone is born ready to do where you see them at today.
Maybe I'll add just right on to exactly online with that, you know, I think knowledge is empowering, and so seek knowledge, right? That, you know, that the Ibn Sina's, book Al-Shifa, health, like the universal like malady that he identified was ignorance, and that, you know, that the prescription was understanding and knowledge, and that if you seek knowledge, I think that would be my advice, is to seek knowledge. And a great place to seek knowledge, my advice would be to pay attention to Electronic Intifada. It's a great resource, and they do a live stream every Thursday, and it's full of all kinds of empowering knowledge and insight and interviews. And so, yeah, obviously, educator, self-interested to seek knowledge.
And also read. It's not that Brandon was suggesting otherwise, but it's one thing that you will quickly realize once you've read even just one or two books about the conflict that are worth reading. And the literature on the Israel-Palestine conflict could fill like a medium-sized library, but 99% of it is worthless. But but a lot of it is very, very useful. And once you do that, you'll almost stop paying attention to the like CNN or the New York Times. It just kind of annoys you. You're like, no, that's wrong. No, that's wrong. No, that's wrong. Screw this stupid article. And that's when you'll actually migrate to more alternative sources like EI or like If Americans Knew or Democracy Now. Or there's plenty of them. And so I think that yeah, if you have the chance, or like look through Jose's Linktree and reading list, you know, like and anything like that, where you can come to something that you can you can read it and you can think about it for a minute. You can talk about it with your friends. You know, that it's you know, I know everybody, you know, does the Instagram scroll now, but reading a book is just it's absolutely invaluable if you want to be able to have the knowledge to actually go to somebody either who is trying to give you backlash and have a discussion with them. And you know, when the more you know, the less anxious you'll get in talking to people like that. But also when talking to somebody who, like you said, or like it says, how to encourage others to partake in solidarity, when people see somebody who clearly knows what they're talking about, they appreciate that, and it's pretty easy to recognize. We all do that in our own lives with our professors and a doctor or whoever. And when you do, when you present yourselves that way, people say this person obviously put some time into this. You know, they care about this. Maybe I should too. So. Well.
Thank you. So we do want to thank everybody, our panelists, for answering our Q&A questions. We do have 15 minutes left, so we will just be opening the floor to the audience for questions. And we're going to not be doing the breakout rooms tonight. But before we get into opening the floor to the audience, we do want to show that we do have a survey, a feedback survey. We're doing a giveaway. We are doing a giveaway, so go ahead and scan your QR codes. We're going to be doing a couple giveaways for your participation and your attendance today. We appreciate you joining us. We had a really big audience today, and we're truly grateful for that. So go ahead, please scan the survey, fill out the survey. You'll be entered into one of these giveaways. We are going to be announcing the winners in our Instagram. So please follow us, sjp.csustan on Instagram if you don't follow us yet, so that you can see if you won the giveaway. We will be contacting you with the email that you provide in the survey. And then we're gonna drop that in the chat as well. And then also, we are going to be, you can go ahead and scan this QR code where it has a more of a digital handout of today's workshop. It has just information about what we talked about today. And if you scan the QR code, you can access the links in the handouts. And so we're going to go ahead and start with the audience to ask any questions you want. You feel free to raise your hand, or if you don't want to speak, you can put your question in the chat, and we're going to have Tiana call on people by order. I think Candace, earlier you did have a question. If you would like to go ahead and ask your question.
Someone put in the chat, just because it's easy to answer, I'll just answer it. How long were you in Gaza? I was there for 2 weeks the first time I went. I'm actually going back on Monday for another 4 weeks. So I'll ask a question since nobody else is. For the panelists, what if you could recommend one book? Brandon, you wrote a book, so it has to be some other book. But but if you could recommend a book for people to read to gain kind of an overarching understanding of the conflict, what would it be?
Anything by Edward Said, I recommend for people. I'm drawing a blank on any titles of books. But yeah, Edward Said, he's a major, he's very an important voice that a lot of people read on what's going on in Palestine, but just kind of just the general region as well.
Yeah, he wrote Orientalism. He wrote The Question of Palestine. Very useful books.
There's a recent one by Lowenstein called The Palestinian Laboratory, about some of the stuff we've been talking about, the sort of interconnections between the US and Israeli defense industries and the experimental weapons that are being done there. Ilan Pappé's The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine is a great book to kind of give a big overview. Rashid Khalidi's 100 Years, The 100 Years War, I think it's called. James Gelvin has another book that's basically kind of got the same title, The 100 Years War for Palestine, I think. Those are all really good. And then there's these ones that are just coming out now. I haven't had a chance to get a hand on, but the Rafat El-Arir collected writings, I think it's called If I Die, based on his poem that has gone. There's that one. Ilan Pappé's newest one is called, or the one he's working on now is called like Lobbying for Zionism Across the Atlantic or something like that. That was a good one. Those are the ones that come to my mind most recently that have touched me.
So
For Edward
actually-
Said, sorry, let me throw in. If you're going to go to Edward Said, I mean, you could read the first 28 pages of Orientalism and give it a stab. Culture and imperialism is going to be a version of the argument that's a little bit more accessible for somebody that isn't in adab, is more fit for a general audience. Orientalism's pretty esoteric in some ways.
And yeah, I would say Noam Chomsky's Fateful Triangle is a really good overall introduction to the conflict. Its second edition came out in 2000. It's actually the first book I ever read on the topic. I just happened to be walking through the Hopkins bookstore and saw it there. And the subtitle is The United States, Israel, and the Palestinians. And I think that's where I got my original framework for understanding the conflict from. And I think it's still worthwhile today.
And I'll definitely agree with the good doctor that you have to open a real book with like 300 pages and like actually read and engage with a real argument. But that's a big down payment. There's something called the Israel-Palestine Primer by Joel Bainan, and it's more accessible. It gives you in an article form a very brief and a succinct overview that I think helps people get oriented. But yeah, read full-length books for sure.
Well, there's a few such things actually. Then there a lot of them are quite good. If Americans Knew has one that they have a website called ifamericansknew.com or .org. I don't remember. Norman Finkelstein has one as well. He's a Jewish American political scientist and historian. It's on his website. It's normanfinkelstein.com or .org again. I can't remember. And then the one that you just mentioned, yeah, there's and then those are very condensed, very like you said, very accessible. You don't have to have a PhD in Israel-Palestine history to understand them. Orientalism is pretty dense, it's for sure.
I could just chime in with books just real quick, because I know someone's got a question for Dr. Feroze. Read books by Palestinian authors. One of my all-time favorite books is Salt Houses. I cried the entire time, just because like having lived out there and knowing families that this like mirrored their story, and it gives you an insight kind of just like what life is like in Palestine, and honestly Palestinian cookbooks. My friend Hisham Assad, he's Palestinian, but his family are refugees in Beirut in Lebanon. He just came out with another cookbook called Taboon. I highly recommend it. There's a new cookbook that also just came out called Bethlehem. And we can read, and that's good. Like, I love reading. Read up all the books that you can by the authors that have been mentioned, but read Palestinian authors and support them, and try to make a Palestinian dish that's really going to connect you as well.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
that accessing Palestinian culture and art also really helps you undercut the stereotypes of Palestinians that have been drilled into all of our heads, including mine. I had a moment when I was in Gaza where these two guys came up to me, and they didn't speak a word of English, and I don't speak more than 10 words of Arabic. And they were asking if I wanted to pray with them, and it took a minute to like figure out what they were asking. And then, even though I know full well, like, yes, Palestine, especially in Gaza, Palestinians are mostly, 90-something% Muslim, and also very, very religious, but they're not nutcases just because they're Muslims. Like that's ridiculous. But and like I knew, like I've had this same conversation in the West Bank 1,000 times, just saying, "Oh no, I'm not Muslim." People just say, "Oh, thank you, welcome," and then they walk away. Exactly the same thing happened here, but in my mind, I started like my heart rate went up a little bit. I was like, "Oh crap, I have to tell them I'm not Muslim," and then I was like, "What are you?" moron? They don't care. They're just asking if you want to pray with them. And if you say no, they'll just walk away from you and leave you alone. But these stereotypes have been so drilled into us by every news story. It's outrageous. And so accessing Palestinian art, it really does help undercut those things. And that's critically important, actually.
Thank you, T. Go ahead.
Alrighty, so we have a handful of questions in the chat, but starting with Danny Hernandez's question, and this is for the entire panel. How do we stay positive in the face of genocide?
Know that you have the power to stop it. That's what I would say. I mean, it's this attack on Gaza is probably the most extreme use of military violence in my lifetime. I don't think that anything, I was born in 1982. I can't think of anything else that comes close. I mean, there's been the time that I've been alive has been a bloody time in the world. Hopefully they're not correlated, but this is really that nothing like this has ever been done to an area this size. It's the level of destruction. It takes about 15 or 20 minutes to accurately explain what has been done to Gaza over the past 15, 16 months, what's still being done to it now, actually. And so it's hard to stay positive necessarily, but again, recognize that none of it would happen without your money. That's okay. I don't want my money going there. And yeah, it takes a long time to change things and to change the society that we live in. So that our political class also thinks that genocide is bad. Right now they don't. Neither one of our political parties do, unfortunately. As long as it serves our interests, it's fine. But like if you look at, pardon me. If you look at Indonesia's invasion of East Timor, I think it started in 1978 or 79. It went on until like 1998. And a third of a third of East Timor's population was killed during that time, mostly through starvation and other such depravities. That's outrageous. So we supplied 90% of the arms. We supplied all of the diplomatic cover. It still took almost 30 years to stop. That's more than most of you have probably been alive. Well, that's, okay. That's what it is. That's the society it'd be nice if we were all born 300 years in the future when all you had to do was say, hey, guys, this is genocidal. And people are like, oh, shoot, it is. We don't like that. But that's not the time we live in. We live in a time when genocide, again, not for Americans, but for the American political and ruling class, is just fine. As long as it serves our interests, not someone else's. So that's our goal, is to change our society. Yeah. And just got to keep working on it.
Thank you. Dave, you want to go?
Yes, moving on to the next question. This is specifically for Dr. Feroze. What made you want to volunteer and go to Palestine, and what was the most difficult part about it?
The only thing I've worked in Palestine, but I've worked in the West Bank before. I actually lived in Israel for about a year after I graduated from college. I worked with like an Arab Jewish cooperative there. I got very involved in the conflict when I was a freshman in college. That's when the Second Intifada broke out, and then 9/11 happened the next year, and then the invasion of Iraq happened 2 years later. So it was a very politicizing time for me. And I just kind of stuck with it. I've edited books on the topic for the University of California Press, for OR Books in London, for the Institute for Palestine Studies. And when you're that deep into something, you better just keep going with it, because it doesn't make any sense to reverse course and do another 25 years of reading on something else. So yeah, and what was the hardest part about being there? I got to be honest, I'm a trauma, like, sorry, I'm in scrubs because I literally ran out of the OR and came here. But the hardest part of being there was knowing that, just wondering, oh, I wonder if I paid for the bullet in that kid's head or in that kid's head, or the bomb that shredded that kid. It's, I'm used to dealing with children who are hurt and in pain, and I'm used to having people die, including kids. It sucks, but it doesn't really bother me, but I'm not usually the one responsible for also shooting them. And that's what my motivation is when I come back, honestly. But also, the work I do abroad, has always been in areas that the United States has something to do with. Zimbabwe was a little bit random just because I just had a friend that works there, so I went there. But the U.S. is a global power in every sense of the term, and so when I go to help people stay alive or help their children stay alive, it recharges my moral batteries. Honestly, it does. I think I did a good thing, and okay, go do it again sometime.
Thank you. We can do one more.
We can do one more question. We have a question for the doctors. Why should we care that the Trump administration is pulling out of the WHO?
It's a ridiculous thing to do, but it's a long discussion that doesn't have a lot to do with the Palestinians, I would say. So maybe we should do a different question instead. If anybody wants to look up what people who know a lot more about public health than I do have said about it, just Google it. It's there. There's plenty of commentary about this online, much of which is quite sensible.
Yeah, so just due to time, it is our time. If you would like to stay a little bit longer and ask a few questions, that is okay too. Just thank you so much to everyone, to our guest speaker, to our panelists for just giving your time and being here with us. Again, please follow us on Instagram for Students for Justice in Palestine at Stan State. We do meet every second and fourth Wednesday of the month. So today was our general meeting, but we decided to do this event today. And then follow our link tree for those resources. We're going to add some of the resources that our guest speakers talked about. We're going to add them to our link tree as well. And we thank you again so much for being here tonight, and feel free to stay and ask questions if you'd like. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, y'all. That was dope.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you everybody for coming.
Jasmine, I see your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, my environment's a little bit loud, but I just kind of wanted to ask about other activism groups and how it relates to Palestinian advocacy. Because I've been able to, like, through finding my footing in advocism, joining other groups like the NAACP and like a oversight committee for my local police board. And do you think that I was thinking, does it fall on these other groups to also advocate for Palestinians? And does that put too much of a burden on the already marginalized people? And I was thinking, do we need groups that are specifically for Palestinians, but that there wasn't enough, like, I guess, for like national, but then there's groups like this. And so my question is kind of like how, like, they're related to other advocacy groups, and like the overall polarization and politicization of I guess ethnic groups right now and race, if it'll be more uniting because it's also harder right now, or if this is something that they're just going to kind of add on to, like, oh, it's another thing that you have to advocate for and it's not really going to be taken seriously.
It's a really great question. Katarina's going to answer that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. Divide and conquer. That's what the billionaire and the powerful want, right? So if they can divide us up, whether that be race, class, religion, sexual orientation, whatever it may be, your political party, they're happy. And so that's the way this is why, like I had mentioned, earlier, like Palestinians, they legitimately care what was happening. They don't want, like, the Dakota Access Pipeline. They had signs up in Gaza, for Black Lives Matter and for all these things. So when other groups in the United States want to ignore the Palestinian issue, maybe they're working on something that's so vital and important, like the NAACP, they're doing themselves a disservice. And they're playing right into the hands of the white nationalists or whoever it is that wants to divide and conquer. PETA has gotten a lot of crap. The PETA for animal rights, because they haven't said anything about what's happening to the animals in Gaza. I mean, I foster cats and I'm part of an animal rescue. And it's disturbing to watch kids, go and look in the rubble for their cats, and watching cats die, watching, the dog starving to death. I saw a puppy dead inside of a dead donkey that was starved to death. It's just so, like, you're hoping that something will grab someone's attention for them to care. But the United States, there are groups who have purposely looked away, and it is a disservice to themselves, to their advocacy work and what they care about, because they're ignoring the plight of others. That's just kind of my opinion. And always remember, Palestinians are there for every cause. They care about people. They care about issues. They care about a hurricane hitting the United States. So that's the duty of others to care about them.
And there's already historically a lot of connections, especially between Black Lives Matter and the Palestinians. But just like you said, there's the Palestinians reach out to American activists whenever anything is happening. Basically, it's very consistent on their part. And yeah, I mean, but I think you also asked, like, does it put an undue burden on people of color in the United States? Yeah, that it does. But I mean, that's how do you measure it? How do you measure if it's too much? I think you have to let people decide that for themselves. I think you have to bring these things up in the context that you're talking about. And if people sit down, talk about it, and say, "Look, we got our own problems. We just can't deal with this right now." Okay, that you have to. I think you have to respect that. I'm certainly not going to shit on people because they say, "Look, I don't have. I can't do this right now." But at the same time, sometimes they'll say, "Yeah, you know what? That we should do that. Why aren't we talking about that?" So I think you just bring it up and you see what people think.
I'm sorry, I have to duck out and start dinner to get it. But thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to speak and engage in what was definitely a meaningful and inspiring conversation, and nice to hear from everybody. So thank you very much. Have a good night.
Have a good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you
And
so much.
we do see all the comments. We would love to continue, but yes, we're gonna end it. And thank you so much. We are gonna post this recording in our link tree. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you guys. Good
Everybody,
night.
thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good one.
Got it outside.